We like to cover some of the things that aren't necessarily talked about as frequently, and I feel like the kicking game as a whole, the special teams are harder to compartmentalize and understand as a fan. I don't think no matter what we do, officiating is kind of the same way for me, that no matter what we do as fans, if you don't have experience with it, it's hard to understand the pressure, what goes into it. We just basically, I feel like fans look at it in kind of an unfair way where it's like you're expected to make every kick. You're the person on the field that's expected to have 100% accuracy. The quarterback isn't expected to do that. Other positions aren't expected to do that. They're not expected to win their battle every time, but you're expected to make every kick, no matter down distance, no matter what's going on, field conditions.
Yeah.
And so it seems like you agree with that. So I'd just like you to speak to that a little bit, because I think that's unfair. You were one of the most accurate kickers in the league, and certainly for the Bengals overall, and unquestionably a great kicker, Pro Bowl kicker. But did you feel that kind of pressure every time? I'm just kind of curious what your mindset was like.
Well, the actual pressure of it, that's when you give yourself the perception that one task is more important than the exact same task in a different situation. So I always tried to keep out of that mindset so that everything was just another repetition. But really, yeah, and the reason it happens is here's what it is. Fans are so used to seeing what typically looks like the smallest guy on the field run out there for a little bit, walk off their steps, kick a field goal, usually make it. Now guys are making it from 65 and in. The guys make it look easy, so it looks like the kicking job is the easiest job on the field because no one's getting beat up. It's you and the ball on the goalpost. It's kind of what it seems like it is. There's other variables we know, but it's because guys made it look so easy that I think the expectations from fans is that, hey, you've got one job. What's so hard? It's the easiest job on the field. Just do it. Do your job, right? So I think that's where that unfairness comes in. But, we're human, and that's why, there's guys that are in the 90% and the 80%, and those are kind of the top guys and kind of the gold standard. And if you don't reach in the upper 80%, sometimes you get fired.
Exactly. And you could just have a bad streak. You could just have maybe some mental struggles, physical struggles. I think that's another thing that gets kind of underrated. I know we're going to get into your school and everything, but I know that's a big part of the training for that position and any other, and people need to not forget that it's a big part of that position, the training, the physical aspect, having the strength, obviously specifically in the legs, but all throughout the body. I think people underestimate the amount of training that goes in, and I don't think people understand that when a kicker maybe seems a little bit off, just having something in that chain that you have to use to get your kick form correct, that you've done thousands, tens of thousands of times over your career, that if there's just a little bit of a pebble in the road of that whole kicking motion, then that can throw the kickoff and make it look quote unquote bad because it's made you go a little left and pull it or whatever, push it to the right. But between all of that, I feel like people don't understand that, like, hey, they have injuries too, just because they're not taking as many hits, although you do sometimes on a kickoff. There's still some nuance to, there might be fighting through some injuries with a kicker, and they're just not saying anything. So I'm sure you dealt with that over the course of your career too.
Yeah, and I always made sure that I never complained about my injuries in front of my teammates because I saw what they went through when it comes to, not only just the fatigue and wear and tear, but, the collisions, the car wrecks they're having on almost every play. But, what happens is you go through the same repetitive, explosive movement over and over and over and over, it creates a little bit of degeneration potentially in certain joints and certain muscle fibers and certain movements that sometimes are almost an unbalanced, unnatural type of movement. And that's where you can potentially get, this nagging little injury that pops up every now and then. And, nobody wants to be a Wally Pip and hey, I can't go full speed. So they bring somebody else in. That person does really good. And then all of a sudden you feel like your job's on the line or in jeopardy. So there have been times when guys have kind of like, well, I'll fight through it. I'll be fine till next week, and then I'll get a rest after the game, and I'll be fine. That does happen. But also part of our job is to know how to train, and that's part of what I do with my training systems that I do with guys, is actually teach guys and educate guys on how to train for what I call prehab, which is all the little training for the different muscles that your standard weightlifting and standard football team weightlifting doesn't always get. A lot of the little inner workings of the hip complex, and working on making sure that your tensor fasciae lata is as strong as it can be, and your psoas minor and major are as strong as they can be, your gracilis, your adductor longus, your brevis, like pectineus. I could name off all the muscles in the leg and tell you there's ways you have to know how to train them separately that just doing a squat or a leg press or a leg extension just isn't going to get. So part of it is knowing how to do that and making sure that those muscles are in their peak form so that they have, the strength and explosion to create the force on the ball that you're looking to get, but also have the, have the durability to handle, a lot of extra kicks in a game and a lot of, you don't get that like fatigue because you're out of kicking shape or whatever. You have to stay in a certain place. And, guys are learning how to do that a lot more often these days. But also there's the matter of, does your form actually create efficient body positioning in your movement and your technique? Because everybody kicks a little different. There is no like cookie cutter form. So everyone's going to kick a little different. And some guys, I'll be honest with you, they have, bad posture and bad body positioning. So they're going to get a little extra torque in their low back or a little extra torque in their mid back, and their hips are going to, under rotate, so they're putting more stress on the adductor muscles as opposed to their quad muscles. I could bore you with all kinds of talk like that, but that's our job, is to know how to do that. And some guys learn how to adapt and improve themselves. I was always trying to find a way to improve things to make my body positioning more efficient, which actually allowed me to be stronger at the end of my career than I was in the beginning of my career. When I was in my late 30s, I could kick further than I could when I was in my mid-20s.
That's interesting. There was a ton of interesting stuff in there, especially the last piece. Also, I'm not bored. I'm impressed. We like stuff like that on this show. Admittedly, you could have kind of snuck in, like when you were listing all those leg muscles, which apparently I have those leg muscles as well. They're not as strong as yours, but I ostensibly have the same muscles. But you could have snuck in like a rare species of South American fish, and I wouldn't have known. I would have just thought it was the leg muscle. So part of me is hoping that you actually did that as part of that. But no, that's impressive. And we're going to take a quick break here and come back, but I want to come back and talk about a few of the things that you mentioned in there. That I think the Wally Pip comparison is interesting because I didn't think of that with kickers, but that is probably most prominent, other than maybe the quarterback position, to get quote unquote the Wally Pip treatment and all of that stuff you said about training the leg and the proactivity. Want to talk about that in the forum. Having a great conversation with Shayne Graham, former Pro Bowl kicker here. He has a school here in Grand Rapids. We're also going to preview the Bengals game. I want to do that real quick first because this is your former team. I know you have a lot of connections there. So I'm curious what you think of the current Bengals team. Obviously, they had a big hit with the injury to Joe Burrow, but I want to kind of get your assessment of what you see from one of your former teams, and kind of I want you to break down the kicker a little bit, since that's what your expertise is.
So, with your starting quarterback being out, that's always a tough loss. I have, been pulling for the Bengals since I've retired. Their special teams coordinator, Darren Simmons, is still one of my closest friends and someone I consider a mentor, but also one of my closest friends. Evan McPherson, I coached him at the University of Florida. I was a college football coach after I retired from playing, and I actually coached Evan McPherson and somewhat helped steer him to Cincinnati. I'm not going to say I'm responsible for him getting drafted there, but I know they were being fed his film all year long before the draft because I wanted him to keep their eye on him, and they ended up drafting him. But, Evan's done an amazing job there with Cincinnati. I mean, what can you say about Bates as well? I mean, he's done an amazing job, an amazing story for how he got to the NFL and how great he's done in Detroit. But, it's funny. I say I pull for the Bengals, but my wife's family and, they're all Lions fans, so I consider myself a homer, and I pull for the Lions.
I love that. I was curious about that because in the X post I put your current hometown team versus the team you're most associated with from your playing career. But the Lions are a hard team not to root for. I know that we're a Lions market, and so it's easy to say that, and they're going to say that in every market. But I do think there's something to them kind of being the new version of America's team because they're a likable team. Dan Campbell is a likable coach, and I feel like they've taken over from the Cowboys a little bit. They even did that when they made it to the NFC Championship game. I remember them they did a study on which states were rooting for which teams when there were 4 teams left. It was the Lions, the 49ers, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. And the obvious states, aside from a couple in the area of Missouri there and Kansas, were rooting for Kansas City. Then you had Maryland and I believe Kentucky, because of the Louisville connection for Lamar Jackson, were rooting for Baltimore. And then obviously California for the 49ers. And then the other 45 states were all rooting for the Lions. And I had never seen a clearer depiction of kind of the new version of America's team, which back when you were playing and before was kind of more the Cowboys. But that's fun that you're rooting for them. I wanted to ask you about Bates because obviously it's a great story. I'm sure you're familiar with his story coming over from the USFL, UFL area here in Michigan. He played for the Panthers and was hitting great kicks in an empty stadium, but there's something to be said. This is something that I'm curious if you kind of wonder. You're focused on molding and mentoring young kickers and punters, and it's amazing that a guy like Jake Bates, who is one of the best kickers in the league now, kind of slipped through the cracks. He's in the same class as McPherson, but you molded McPherson. You had him under your tutelage, so you probably got him further ahead of the game, got him onto people's radar, especially in Cincinnati, like you mentioned. And then you've got somebody like Bates, who's got very similar ability and is a great kicker, but basically had to go to the USFL, UFL route to even make it to the league. And that's intriguing to me because there's probably a lot of kickers out there that would be great. We just haven't heard of them yet.
And that is the honest truth. I mean, it took me 2 years to make it after college. I know guys like David Akers, Adam Vinatieri, guys that are legends and good friends of mine, that they all have a similar struggle story themselves. Not quite, everybody's story's a little different, but, it's timing. And really the way it works out, you've got 32 guys in the world on any given Sunday that are NFL kickers. Does that mean there's only 32 guys good enough to do it? Absolutely not. But NFL teams really don't keep a backup kicker. It's rare. Every now and then you see teams keep a guy on the practice squad, And that really wasn't a thing until really COVID, when you were just afraid your kicker was going to get popped in a test right before the game, so you had to have somebody ready to go. But, they've kind of expanded the practice squad, so there's more room on the roster for that now. So occasionally you'll see teams keep a guy around, but if you're not the starter, you do not dress on game day. You are probably not on a team, and you are on your couch watching the games. So the timing of, there might be guys that you may be better than them, but they're still really good, and they probably haven't given their team a reason to get rid of them. So it's just, how do you fit into those one or two slots every other week or so where somebody gets hurt or somebody doesn't perform well enough and they get the boot? And then in the off season, when teams are kind of evaluating, do we draft a guy? Do we bring in an undrafted free agent? Do we sign a free agent to compete with our current guy? Whatever the situation. And then by the time you get down to final roster cuts, you're thinking, who are the 45 guys we're going to dress on the field on game day, and the 53 guys that we're going to have on the official roster? You've only got room for one kicker. When you start looking at, okay, I need to have 22 starters on offense and defense, then you've got to have 22 backups on offense and defense, and then you're like, well, now I've got to have a long snapper, a punter, and a kicker, because you're never going to have a punter be the kicker. It's just not a thing in the NFL. You can't be the best at both. So those roster spots are really kind of tight, and you only have room for one. And then a lot of those backups at the offensive and defensive positions, except for the offensive linemen usually, those guys have to make their value seen on special teams and coverage and the return game, protecting punts, trying to block punts, all that kind of stuff. That creates a lot of value. But the specialist position, because the task that you're giving is so cut and dry, black and white, good, no good, type of a thing, that, it's easy to justify that you're going to fire someone and bring someone new in. But also, if a guy's making the kicks, there's probably a few guys out there on the street, they're called street free agents, that are good enough to play. They just don't have the timing quite then and there for that opportunity.
See, I knew we were going to learn a lot during this interview, and that's another tidbit there. I guess I didn't think of the fact that you make a great point about the roster structure as a whole, but I think that's probably why these guys get aggregated a little bit, where like when Bates won out, he was able to show what he was able to do, at least in a professional football game, maybe not the NFL, but he was able to have that platform to be able to do it. But that's probably why they have a lot of guys that maybe were struggling some, but they have a tendency to go with somebody like that they've actually got tape on, versus an unproven guy. Like, hey, yeah, this guy was a decent kicker in college, but we don't know how he's going to handle the stress of an NFL game. We don't know how he's going to handle the pressure, and so we'll go with a guy that we know has at least been an NFL kicker and hope that he can improve for us.
Absolutely. And I mean, the same thing is now happening in college football too. I mean, if you look at it, when's the last time the University of Michigan had a kicker that they offered out of high school that came through and played? They've been getting grad transfers. And what these colleges are able to do is basically a free agent system. Why do we want to take a chance on a kid coming out of high school who hasn't been away from mom and dad yet, who hasn't figured out, managing their free time and their academics and their social life and their football life? We're going to get a kid who's already played, already gone through all that, so they're going to get a transfer and bring them in. So you kind of see that side of it in college. But, even when you get these guys in the NFL, you have some of these guys that, they can show on YouTube that they can kick the ball a mile. They can have all these great workout films, and maybe sometimes they even work out or try out really well in front of the coaches. But when you get in that stadium, it is a completely different mental mindset. And that mindset that you have, which is another thing that I train the psychology of performance, is you have to understand physically kicking a ball in the NFL is actually easier by scientific measure. It's easier in the NFL than it is in college. And the reason that's so is because, one, the hashes are narrower, so you don't have to kick from as wide out on the field. Okay, the goalposts are the exact same goalposts. They just have 5 feet extensions on the NFL goalposts compared to college. And by rule, if the ball goes over top of the upright in college, any part of the ball over top of the upright, it's considered no good. In the NFL, as long as no part of the ball goes outside of the outer edge, so part of the ball can still go over top of the upright, and it can technically still be called a good field goal. So you take all those things, add the fact you've got a long snapper that gets paid a lot of money to do his job. You've got a holder who practices it every day to do his job. You're playing on the best natural grass surfaces that money can produce, and you're playing on great turf surfaces as well, not to mention the plethora of indoor stadiums where you're actually protected from the weather. So all of these things kind of make it physically an easier task, but it's a lot different when you have to think about the fact that if I have a bad kick or if I have a bad game, I don't just get to come back and enjoy my scholarship for 2 or 3 more years and get to go to class the next day and all that. I might be fired when I get off that plane. And that's a whole different, mindset to realize if I miss, I can be fired. And that is something that a lot of guys really, some guys handle it, some guys don't. And that's why, I've seen guys that physically have the ability to be some of the strongest, best kickers in the world, but it never materializes in the NFL because it's a completely different mindset when you've got those gears turning in your head, letting you be a little bit afraid of what might happen at the end of the result of that play.
Man, Shayne, I knew this was going to happen, but I have a lot more questions. That was all great stuff. The good news is that we're going to be talking to Shayne next week and kind of review the game with him and get more of his insights, because I think this is the first interview in a while that I've actually ended with more questions on my sheet than I started with, because I've been jotting some down knowing I'm going to talk to you next week. But I want to make sure that you get a chance. We'll talk about this more next week for sure, but to plug the school and talk about the school, because you're doing a lot of great stuff for kickers, and you can tell punters as well, and you could tell how much knowledge Shayne has in that field.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've actually worked with Fox some on his punting as well. I'm not going to take any credit for any of his success because he is what he is before he ever met me. But he does come and work with me from time to time in his off seasons. So it's elitewinningsolutions.com. That's my website. And all my socials kind of have all my connections and kind of examples and everything on my social media and my EWS social media. But I try to take the skill and, I get as technical as I feel like you're able to comprehend. So I don't just throw all this super technical stuff at you at first. We get started slow. We work on basic concepts. We go over details. We start working on body efficiency, ball striking, work our way back from there. And, I do private lessons. I do some group lessons. And then I do mental performance training. And I do situational training, like how to, not only just how to be prepared for, how do I have game management, practice management, off-season training management, all of those kinds of things, but actual situations in games and how to mentally be prepared for those situations, but how to even pack your bag when you travel. Like I go over every single little detail, and then I've got a weight room in my house that it's specifically built for training kickers and punters. And I actually put guys through little, educational things to show them all the ways to work their hip flexors, their inner adductors, their glutes, their quads, all the things through their core. everything that's going to make them be a better kicker and prevent injury as much as possible. Those are all things that I do along with, slow motion film review and things like that. So it's a passion. I was thinking I was going to be an NFL special teams coordinator when I was coaching at Michigan State and Central Michigan and University of Florida. But when we decided to get out of the coaching game and just live in Grand Rapids, where my wife's family's from, I fell in love with doing this. I love the relationships. I'm actually going to Caledonia homecoming this week to watch one of my clients kick in his game. So this is an exciting thing for me, and I love doing it.
I think it's such an interesting field to be in, and all of that. I just added about 2 or 3 questions when you just went through all that. So we've got a lot of work to do next week, but I appreciate the time and the insights, because I just find it so fascinating, and I'm glad we're able to illuminate the nuances of this field, because I don't think it gets enough credit. I don't think you guys get enough credit, but we appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to talking with you again next week here.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.